Who's familiar with squatting? Who squats? You squat? Maybe a little bit. There are two different placements that you can put the bar on your back. Anyone know what they're called? High bar and low bar. Okay, you can put the bar on the top of your traps, which is in this position. Now you might not see it unless you have a side view, but we're getting, or I can turn around, that weight on the top of our traps. The alternative is to put it on the lower, the spine of the scapula and the posterior delt. This is called low bar. Do you know why we choose different things or what's it's going to change?
Different muscle groups?
Yeah, the focus is going to be on different muscle groups. So if you've got a side-on view to this, you would see that if the bar's on the traps, it's higher up on my torso. If I want to keep that in line on my center of gravity, okay, I'm going to be in a more vertical position. If I put it lower on my back and still have to hit my center of gravity, I'm going to be slightly leaned over, which is then going to change my biomechanics, okay? It's going to put less pressure on my quads and more on my glutes and abs. Okay, so I'm leaning over slightly and still maintaining that center of gravity, because that's where I'm strongest. That's where I'm going to be able to lift the most weight. So two different positions on the bar. But let's start with the foot position. How wide should you start when you stand in a squat? Anyone have, how wide do you go when you squat?
I go a little wider than that.
Shoulders and hips? Yeah, about, shoulder width apart is good. It's a little wider than hips for sure. You want to be able to descend and get between the hips. So what we like to do, and it will depend on your leg mass, it will depend on your hip mobility, your structure in the hips, because everyone has different sockets, depths, okay? So that means when in the hip you have a ball and socket joint, if you have a really deep socket, you can't move so easily, and things get in the way real easy. If you have a very shallow socket, it's a lot more mobile, it's a lot easier. So it's easier to move and it's less impingement. You won't get so much pain so easily. So we want to have it a little wider than hips. Our toes should point out slightly. Okay, we want to externally rotate. That's how we turn on. What's external rotators? It's our glute medius. Okay, we want to turn on these glutes. In order to do that, we have to externally rotate. When we do that, that comes from the hips. That turns our whole leg out, which means our knees face out because our hips face out, and our knees should be in the same line as our toes. It's just a hinge joint. So we're under the bar. We're about just wider than hip width. Our toes are slightly wider. We want to externally rotate. So that's the first cue on the movement, is to actually try to externally rotate, kind of corkscrew your feet into the floor and try to rotate out. Now when I do this, if you can even try, the first thing that happens when I try to turn my toes out is my knees slightly bent. Okay, that's going to start my descent. That rotation puts me in a strong, tense position. My legs are really tight because I'm trying to turn into the ground, and it's not quite letting me. So now I'm ready to start the descent. So that's the leg part. We talked about the different positions in the high bar versus the low bar. What's consistent about both of them is the wedge that we need to create. Okay, we need to pull back and create a very rigid torso, because we've got, could be a lot of weight that's going to go on our back. So we're going to pull those elbows down and tight into our backs. We're going to pull the elbows in together and try to create a rigid, what's called a wedge in the torso. So it's nice and tight. We're activating our lats, pulling in. You remember, think of a lat pull down? We're going to get those lats. Now the lats run from the bottom of the hip all the way up to the arm. So if I pull in my elbows, I can contract those lats, and that's an extensor of the spine. So I can keep it in a nice rigid position by pulling my elbows in, and that way I'm not going to bend or have any flex in the spine when I squat. If I have flexion in the spine, it may start to get injuries. We definitely don't want to do that.
Can you call the front so you can kill the radio for this room?
What I advise when you are warming up, we'll go through warm-ups in a little bit. When you do a squat, do it from an empty bar first. Pull in those elbows. Externally rotate. We've got feet just wider than our hips, toes slightly out, externally rotating into the floor. That breaks the knees. Tight core, elbows into each other, pulling the bar into my torso. Nice, strong, rigid torso. Then goes into the breath. How do we breathe? What do we think? Do we breathe in or breathe out before we go down? Breathe in. Good. We want to add pressure to the torso. Okay, we want to add stability. So if we take a big breath in, and we close our glottis, we stop breathing, and we push all the air into our stomach and make a big stomach, that's going to make my torso really, really tight and rigid, and it's not going to be able to flex. So, elbows in, big breath, hold it, push the belly out against my ab wall, squat down. At the bottom, I recommend that you pause. Okay, this is a great time to analyze, is your weight even? Okay, forward to back, I've got too much pressure on my toes, too much pressure on my heels, or is it dead in the center of my foot on a tripod? Okay, when we have weight in a squat position, your foot, if you imagine this is the foot, the heel of the foot, the base of the big toe, and the base of the little toe. 3 points of contact that you want to have center of all your weight when you squat or do any really movement. Okay, so we don't want to have it too far to the sides. We want the big toe pushed down. Although we externally rotate and we start to rotate those feet out, that often puts a lot of weight on the outsides of the feet. If you see how I'm lifting my foot, kind of supinating, we still want to drive that big toe down. So we support our arch. We have a strong foot. So hips width apart, toes slightly wider, externally rotating, drive the big toe down, create the wedge, create the breath. Big breath in, going down, analyzing front to back. I'm nice and balanced. I can stay here all day if I want. What about right to left? Now you might need a mirror. You might need someone to spot you and look. But are you going more to the right or more to the left? Is something more active on one side of the body than the other in the glutes? Okay, we want it to be obviously dead neutral so we get equal contribution from either side of the body. What about low bar? Same thing really. If I put it into a low bar position, most of the cues will stay the same. I pull my drive, I go into that posterior delt, spine of the scapula, I pull the elbows tight in, same positioning in my feet, toes slightly wide, externally rotating, break. I do have to hip hinge a little bit to get it onto my center of gravity. Coming down, I'm finding my balance, push back through that same movement path. Any questions on that? Okay, did you want to try it? Anyone want to try? Come on then, Brittany, come give it a try. You're a little bit taller than me, so I'm going to move these racks. Tobes, you coming out? For those that haven't met Toby, this is Toby. He's our support dog. Yeah, come on over here. Come lay down. Lay down. Sit. Stay. Stay. Okay, so going under, we want to make sure our feet are placed. That's still too low for you? Let's go up a little. Perfect. So you go in high bar position on top of the traps. Feet are in the right position. We're going to lift off. Take a brace already. Try and lift with the not your arms, but the body. So get your body under. Good. Push the hips forward. Good. Excellent. So pause at the bottom. Analyze the weight. Is it forward and back on that foot? It looks pretty even right now. It looks good. Come back up. Good. Walk back a little bit. Come away from this rack. Good. How tight is your elbows and your back pulling in? If I push down in here, is it going to be tight? Is the muscles contracted? So we want to pull that bar down onto our back as if you're going to make it heavier. Okay, pull them nice and tight. That's going to lock up that back, make sure it's really rigid, and it's not going to flex when we go down. Go ahead, big breath in, pull back on the bar, out, knees go wide, externally rotate as you go down. Balance, excellent, good. Now back up through that path. Good, let me look right down that center. One more rep, go ahead. Good. Coming up. That looks pretty good, Brittany. Okay, so we always want to start with a empty bar. You can rack the bar. Walk forward. Take that weight off of you. Excellent. Good job. Thanks for wearing your mask. So we always want to start with an empty bar. Okay, we want to potentiate. We want to slowly increase in our weight. That way, we can recruit more and more muscle fiber each time we lift. We don't want to fatigue the muscle, but we want to make sure it's active, and it will become active at light weights, and then we progressively get it heavier and heavier. So, if we want to really focus on the quads, we can do the high bar. If we really want to focus on the glutes and the hamstrings, we can do the low bar. If we wanted to exaggerate it even more, and you've probably seen this in the weight room before, we can have an incline on the heel. Okay, that's going to tip us up a little bit. Okay, some shoes have a slight incline. Okay, they're designed that way, so it increases your mobility. One of the limiting factors on a lot of people's squat is their ankle mobility. Okay, they can't squat down very low because their ankles aren't very mobile. If I put it, this is about 1.5 inches to 2 inches. If I put this on my heel, look what it does to my ankles. It pushes them forward. I'm going to push my whole weight forward. I can squat down here, and it's easy because my ankle flexibility is basically improved. I've increased my ability for my tibias, my shin bone, tibia, to move forward over my toes. Okay, it's going to put way more pressure. Look at the angle at the knee. This is a huge angle. My hamstrings is touching my calves. Okay, a lot of contraction or stretch happening right here in the quads, which then means it's going to contract a lot to come back up. Not as much happening at the hips as if I was to be here. I've got more contraction at my hips than in my knees. So look, when you think about movements and what muscles are being the focus, look at the range of motion about the joint and how much is actually happening, extension and flexion. The more stretch that happens, then the more contraction that has to happen. And we can manipulate these at different joints. So if I want to really focus on my quads, I could increase the knee flexion by putting something under my heel. That's going to tilt me forward, going to make my torso more vertical, more pressure on my quads. Alright, let me see if I forgot anything I wanted to talk about. No, I didn't. Okay, so what about, how do we warm up for this? We've talked about all the things that go into this movement. The muscles are activated. How do we warm up those muscles? When we think about warm-ups, we want to think about, you want to mobilize and we want to potentiate and we want to increase the blood flow to that area. What muscles are active? What did we just talk about? Glutes, hamstrings, quads, the main three, okay? Yes, we've got all our erectors in our back, we've got our calves, we've got a lot of our foot positioning happening, but the big three movement muscles are quads, hamstrings, and glutes. So how do we create that? How do we simulate that? Well, you could do a bodyweight squat. Depends on your individual preferences and your differences and where your mobility are, where you're struggling, to how to open up a hip maybe. But ideally you want to send blood flow and warm up the glutes, the hamstrings, the quads. So I love to do a banded walk. I could put a band on my thighs, I pull out, so that's lateral glutes, right, glute medius, as I pull out against the band, and I walk on a treadmill at an incline. Okay, quads, hamstrings, glutes, all firing as I walk on a treadmill. Very easy. You don't want to fatigue the muscle because they're about to do work, but you want to warm them up, send blood flow that way, send stimulation that way. So banded walks is good. A bodyweight squat is another good one. I'm about to squat, same movement path. The muscles are going to get used to activating in the same way. Kettlebell swing would be another option. You could do a kettlebell swing. Even a plank. You think about plank, that's hard for your body to do. It's a good core exercise. But what's the body in terms of the torso? What's it doing when we squat? Dead straight, right? We don't want any movement in that torso. What's the plank doing? It's practicing exactly that. So it's a great way to warm up.